please feel free. Just let me know. Let me know. Who's asking. And I'll try to be responsive. And if I don't respond on the screen, you can email me and I'll try to respond during the week. All right. Now, the background to our discussion of Jerusalem is kind of, manyfold. One is that next week, some parts of the community are going to celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, the day of the reconquest of Jerusalem. Now, I have to tell you that since the beginning, I guess after the first or second year following, after 1969, I know, or maybe it took into the 70s, I stopped seeing the day of Jerusalem Day as a day that should be celebrated. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to me because I grew up in a yeshiva world where the rabbis were arguing about whether you should say the songs of praise, the Hallel, on Yom HaAtzmaut, on Israeli Independence Day. But when we recaptured Jerusalem, every rabbi and every yeshiva in other words, of the Zionist variety, recited Hallel, or the songs of praise, with a blessing. Whereas on the day, on the Independence Day, they didn't. Or it was a dilemma. It didn't make sense to me. Israeli Independence Day, the miracle of Israeli Independence Day was that thousands or hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives were saved. The so-called miracle of Jerusalem Day is that stones were recaptured. And it seems to me that there you have the dilemma. This is the dilemma of what the nature of Zionism is. Is it about stones and territory, or is it about lives? Is it about the holiness of the way people live, or is it about the holiness of place? And I'm always, maybe I'm an extremist, so I know some people will take umbrage or will resist my formulation. I see someone, Alan, I'm an extremist here in my rejection or my resistance to the notions of sacred place, because inevitably, people die because of sacred place. Throughout history, we've been killing each other over sacred places. It goes on in India today, right? In other words, you name holiness. Holiness needs to be controlled. That's what we're talking about. That holiness that gets out of hand eats you up. And in other words, I understand the role of religion as a human initiative, as a way in which we reflect God's presence, as a way of limiting holiness, limiting the power of sanctity to overwhelm us, to tempt us. So I've become a resistor to the celebration of Jerusalem Day. I mean, and then all sorts of things happen. The marching through the Arab quarter, and the triumphal march through the Arab quarter. I mean, in other words, all the trappings, the national trappings that are problematic. In other words, and you'll see in a moment what I feel about holy place in general, what it means. But it seems to me we have to approach holiness with a degree of modesty, not with bravura. Okay, so that's one context, the Jerusalem Day. The other context has been the challenge from Muslim sources and regarding the sanctity of Jerusalem. Claims that the temple never stood there, it has no historical significance to the Jewish people. So I wanted to take you on a little trip as we begin, not in Jewish sources, but if you look at the supplement, if you look at the supplemental page, it's the last page in your handout.
Chaim, do you want me to share it on the screen? I think people have been appreciating that.
Okay, why not? All right, I'd like to see people, but okay, if you want to share it, why not? I think it's
You can click your view. You can change your view.
Yeah. Okay. I just have to make sure that I have it. Okay. All right. So what I want to show you there is in the Quran. I mean, you know, one of the issues. What's this pinch out for a blog? What do I need to do to see everybody?
Click the there's like a thing of boxes.
Yeah, I know what that is. The gallery.
The gallery view.
If I find it. All right. It doesn't matter.
Is that working?
No, but it's okay. All right.
All right.
Now, so if you look in at top of the supplemental sheet, you see the quote from the Quran. It's the last sheet. I'll wait till everybody has it. Okay. So this is the second surah in the Quran, second chapter, and the discussion here is towards which direction should the followers of Muhammad pray? And Muhammad tells them the following: the ignorant among the people will say, what has turned them away from the direction of prayer? What has turned them away from the direction of prayer they once followed? Now, this seems to allude to what we know to be a fact, at least it's recorded in the tradition, in the Islamic tradition, that for 13 years, Muhammad prayed facing Jerusalem. When he was in Medina, when he was in Mecca, he prayed facing Jerusalem. Why did he pray facing Jerusalem? Right? Why? Anybody tell me why? Why would Muhammad pray facing Jerusalem?
To make nice with the Jews, because other prophets were in Jerusalem.
Well,
in the Holy Temple.
That's sort of a political understanding of the motive.
Many of the prophets were in Jerusalem.
Yes, that's correct. In other words, he prayed facing Jerusalem because he recognized Jerusalem as a source of holiness, because the temple had stood in Jerusalem. And that is a recognized mode of prayer. A secondary, you're right, there may have been a sort of this political idea that if he prays towards Jerusalem, Jews will follow him, but I don't think that was the primary motive at that time. He was trying to envelop himself in the holiness of the tradition. And so praying to Jerusalem made sense. So, however, at some point he changes the direction. 13 years later, in 630, I think it's 634, he changes the direction. Now, so he says there are those who are going to say, "Why are you changing direction?" You know, the doubters, perhaps referring to Jews, say to them, "To God belongs the east and the west. He guides whom he wills to a straight path." So basically, it doesn't matter which direction you pray, as long as you pray in the direction that God directs you, in which God directs you to pray. And now the Qibla, the direction, has been changed. Thus, we made you a moderate community. He's talking about Muslims. I don't want to get into Islamic thought here, but we'll read the verse. That you may be witnesses to humanity and that the messenger may be a witness to you. We only established the direction of prayer, which you once followed, that we may distinguish those who follow the messenger from those who turn on their heels, right? So we had a direction. Those who followed in that direction, they became adherents of our tradition. It is indeed difficult, except for those whom God has guided. But God would never let your faith go to waste. God is kind towards the people, merciful. So, I mean, there are different ways of interpreting what's going on here, but I like to take this simple way, that Muhammad is justifying the fact that initially he faced towards Jerusalem. Now there's a change. People of faith will follow him because it's a type of test. God says, pray towards Jerusalem. That's for one period. Now God says, in the name of Muhammad, in the name of God, turn to a different direction, and the people of faith will follow Muhammad in this new direction. We have seen your face turn towards the heaven. This is God, this is Allah talking to Muhammad. We is Allah. We have seen, Muhammad, your face has turned towards heaven, towards me. So we will turn you toward a direction that will satisfy you. So turn your face towards the Sacred Mosque. So this becomes the official redirection of Muhammad from facing Jerusalem to facing the mosque in Mecca. the Kaaba. Now, and wherever you may be, turn your faces towards it. Those who were given the book know that it is the truth from their Lord, and God is not unaware of what they do. All right. So the facing towards the Kaaba is now a rejection of the old way, and it becomes a significant way of distinguishing between Jews and Muslims. Jews pray towards Jerusalem, Muslims pray towards Mecca. In other words, it's always in the growth pains of a new religion that emerges out of another religion. There are steps along the way where the new religion distinguishes itself. It's only natural. No, I don't think we should take it personally that we were being rejected, even though there's an understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, which is that the Jews have basically rejected Muhammad, and he doesn't see any need any longer to be with them. All right, but the larger issue here is that it's clear that the Muslims are emerging as their own community, apart from the Jews. If they're going to be their own community, they have to pray towards their place. They have a story different from ours. In their narrative, Abraham not only sanctified the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, where he sacrificed or brought Isaac as a sacrifice, they recognize that, but Abraham also went with Ishmael to Mecca, where he sanctified the Kaaba. So the Kaaba was sanctified by Abraham, then it was turned into a place of idolatry, and Muhammad's trying to recover the center in Mecca as a center for Islam. Now in Medina, when Muhammad was in Medina with the Jewish community, there was a mosque that was known as the Mosque of Qiblatain, or whatever. It's sort of like the double Qibla, the double direction, because in Medina, what happened was that Muhammad prayed both, supposedly, there's a tradition, facing towards Mecca, south, and facing towards Jerusalem in the north. Perhaps. So it's suggested. And then 13 years later, he turned around to Mecca. That was the direction. Okay. Now, a couple more things about Islamic relationship to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem has some old roots in Islam. It's not just that it's not mentioned, we know it's not mentioned in the Quran. Okay. But here it is, without a name. It's referring to it. There is a record of an 8th or 7th, 8th, 9th century Jewish midrash, which is called Nistarot Shel Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's a legendary material. Now, in this legendary material, we read almost at the beginning, it's a short treatise. The second king who will arise from Ishmael will be a friend of Israel. The second king is Umar, or Omar, as we know him. So we will turn you towards the direction that, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong verse. He will repair their breaches. What breaches will he repair? And fix the breaches of the temple and shape Mount Moriah and make the whole of it a level plain. So Omar is going to re-establish the Temple Mount, which had become a garbage pile. When Omar, the legend is, when Omar reached Jerusalem, he asked to be taken to the Temple Mount. The Christian bishop who greeted him wanted to take him to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as a place to pray. Omar insisted that he take him to the Temple Mount, which is where he wanted to pray, and he beheld the garbage dump that it had become, and he engaged with Jews whom he encouraged to come with him in the cleansing and purification of the Temple Mount, to prepare it. And the legendary Jewish text says, Omar, the second king of Ishmael, second caliph, he will build for himself there a place for prayer upon the site of the foundation stone, as scripture says, and set your nest on the rock. All right, fascinating. In other words, the Jewish midrash, writing in hindsight, obviously, and trying to frame the Islamic conquest as a redemptive conquest, because the Muslim arrival in Palestine in the seventh century was indeed experienced as redemption from the oppression of the Christians. The Muslims were going to usher in the rebuilding of the temple, and there's something actually in this Nistarot of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's not an accident that we're reading it tonight as Lag BaOmer. It's the Yortzeit of Shimon Bar Yochai, right? So it's a text that's attributed to a second century sage, even though it was written many centuries later. But Shimon Bar Yochai lived in a cave for 13 years. So he would have, therein in the cave, he would have been able to gather these secrets and understand what will happen in the future. And what he's doing in this text, as it's formulated, is predicting that there will be an Islamic redemptive movement that will arrive. The second caliph will come, and he'll level the Temple Mount, and he'll lay the foundation, and there he will build his house of prayer. So this text knows about the Dome of the Rock, what's called what we call the Mosque of Omar, but which is not a mosque, the Dome of the Rock, which is an utterly magnificent structure on the Temple Mount, which this tradition of Shimon Bar Yochai sees as, in fact, a fulfillment, not a rejection of Judaism, but a continuation of Judaism. More about that in a moment. He will wage war with the children of Esau. Who are the children of Esau? People know? Who are the children of Esau?
The Christians.
The Romans.
Christians. So understand, in the Middle Ages, Ishmael, is the Muslims, and Esau is Christianity. Okay? Edom, Esau, Christianity. Rome and Christianity. He will wage war with the children of Esau and slaughter their troops and capture a large number of them, and eventually he will die in peace and with great honor. Now, the truth is that Omar didn't die in peace. He was assassinated. But all right, that's what happened with the first number of caliphs in Islam. Okay, now, what is this text? What is it telling us? There are a number of possibilities, and each one of them, it carries its own significance. Okay. First of all, what it's telling us about, that this dome was built over the stone, the foundation stone, which we call Even Shtia, which was the center of the old temple, of Solomon's temple. So first, this magnificent Dome of the Rock that's built by Omar, it actually was built after Omar, but it's called the Mosque of Omar. Historically, Omar didn't build it. It was erected in 692, which is after Omar had already died, by Abu al-Bakr, I think, constructed the dome. The dome is built to overshadow one function, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. No longer is Christianity regnant as the dominant religion in the holy city. Right? Islam has arrived, and the Islamic dome is more magnificent than all the Christian structures in the city, which the city was replete with Christian structures. And here come sort of the magnificent Islamic architecture. The gilding of the dome took place later, but you can imagine that even without the gilding, just if you've seen photos of it, if you haven't gone into it, which many haven't, then you'll know the pictures of the dome. It's magnificent, and the inside of the dome is decorated with verses from the Quran, and very pointed verses directed at Christianity. And it's an attempt to demonstrate that Islam eclipses Christianity, and Christianity has a heretical view because Jesus is not the Son of God. That's very central to the Islamic theology. That's written on the walls of the dome. So that's number one. Number two, what the dome does is it creates for Muslims, and this is what we need to know, a Mecca-Jerusalem axis. Jerusalem and Mecca are connected, are linked in holiness, even though Jerusalem is not the number one holy place. It's part of the axis of holiness that comes from the Holy Land, which is considered the Holy Land, God's land in the Quran, to Mecca. In some ways, there's a recognition that the holiness of Mecca is itself dependent upon and linked to the holiness of the Holy Land. There's that awareness. After all, why is Abu Bakr building the Dome of the Rock over the foundation stone? Because it was the site of the temple of Solomon's temple. And what he wants to do is he wants to somehow galvanize the holiness that inheres in this place of Solomon's temple and operationalize it, utilize it for Islam. So Islam derives its sense of the holiness of the dome because it exists. It was built on the Temple Mount. It sort of connects it to the inherent sanctity of the Temple Mount. The third possibility, and this is a minority view, but it's possible that all three explanations hold here, and that is the building of the Dome of the Rock was seen by Muslims as a type of reconstruction of Solomon's temple. There was that awareness, and that it's not just that it draws on the holiness of Solomon's temple. It's a renewal of Solomon's temple to the extent that Islam has arrived and that it has so much of it is grounded in Judaism, that in biblical Israel. Then it also draws its sense of significance in this way by fulfilling. There's almost a type of messianic fulfillment on their part. Now, if you turn your sheet, you'll see something very significant text because, and this is a piece of sort of historical documentation. And that is that in 1924, the Muslim Supreme Council which now takes the form of the Waqf, the caretakers of the Holy Mount, of the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, right? Haram, anyone know haram in Arabic means that which is forbidden, unapproachable. It's holy, the holy sanctuary, right? So the noble sanctuary is Haram al-Sharif. So in this brochure on page 1, if you look down below in the paragraph in the sentence that I've underlined, I'll start from the beginning, not the beginning, the middle of the paragraph, two lines before the underline. This site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates from the earliest, perhaps from prehistoric times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. Beyond dispute. The problem is that when Jews assert their historical connection to the place, that's when Muslims begin disputing. When Jews didn't assert their historical connection to the place, there was no rejection by Islam. In fact, Islam affirmed the Jewish connection to the place. So there's a type of dance that the Jews and Muslims are conducting with each other, which is not very fruitful.
If I may, Chaim, if I may, it's less Jews invoking the connection than autonomy, right? Is that more accurate to say?
Well, I'll get to that in a moment. Yes. It's more than autonomy. It's sovereignty.
Okay. Sovereignty. Yeah.
Solomon
now I have what's that? Go ahead.
Solomon is seen as a Muslim by Islam.
Yeah. All right. So look, the point. One of the other reasons that the temple is so important is that Muslims from the 9th century on, not at the very beginning, interpreted the chapter in the Quran, 17, verse 1, on Muhammad's night journey. They interpreted the night journey as a type of a spiritual experience, perhaps, as an imagined experience, whatever, where Muhammad flew from Mecca to Jerusalem at night. Why did he fly? Why did he go to Jerusalem? Because in Jerusalem, there was a convocation. He was greeted by Moses. He actually rose into the heavens and he met all the other prophets. What was important for Muhammad was to claim legitimacy as one of the historical prophets. And the prophets begin with Moses and continue through Jesus, through Muhammad. He's the completion. And he met all the biblical prophets. Included among the prophets, because Islam categorizes them as such, are David and Solomon. So Solomon is classified as a Muslim. Now, understand something. There should ideally be a distinction between a Muslim with a small m, with a lowercase m, and a Muslim with a capital M. What Islam actually really claims is that all of these characters are Muslims, devotees who submitted to God, because that's what Muslim means. What's happened is politics has transformed a lowercase m into a capital M. So that it's as if the claim is that they're really not Jews or not whatever, they are Muslims. Now, the Quran is very clear in what it's attempting to do. It's trying to do something which is both positive and there's something, how should I say, arrogant about it. It's trying to sort of wipe out all distinctions. There are no religions. All there is devotion to God. And Islam means devotion to God. The Jews, however, claim that they're Jews. And the Christians, however, claim that they're Christians. They're the people who are the separatists. We include everybody. Of course, there are a lot of, I don't want to get into that because it's so complicated and so fraught. But you understand, but that to that extent, yes, Solomon is a Muslim. He's a prophet. He's devoted to God. And Muhammad has to identify with him. He's a continuation in that line. What I wanted to show you was the brochures that I have. This is, I don't know if my screen pick it up. Yes. All right. So this is the brochure published in 1924, and this is another brochure also by a brief guy published in 1966. In the brochure published in 1966, it no longer mentions that the Temple Mount was the site of Solomon's temple. In fact, starting in 1951, the brochures that were printed eliminated any reference to the Temple Mount as being the site of Solomon's temple. So, as you see, it's it's politically engineered. Okay, now let's see what time it is. Okay, all right. Now, on the Jewish side, take a look on source number 3 and 4, all right, in the supplement. Just let's see. So in response to the Islamic claim that we have no historical connection, so we claim that this is the site of Solomon's temple, and it's essential, all right? So there are two opinions here about the holiness, and I think number 3 is, and they're contrasting opinions. One, Menachem Froman, who wrote, the national religious public's concept consists of two very forceful elements, a very realistic, materializing one, the actual settlements of the entire Eretz Israel, and a messianic, spiritual one, objection to entering the Temple Mount. The messianic element is perceived from an Orthodox point of view, waiting silently for the Messiah, not creating a false Messiah by our own hands. The holiness of the Temple Mount is expressed not by barging into it, but rather by withdrawing from it. So Froman understands that holiness is haram, prohibited, forbidden. Therefore, if it's holy, it's God's. And no human being can claim sovereignty over that which is holy. It seems to me that Clinton tried to propose that. Now, that's a very interesting understanding, and it's a true understanding, it seems to me, about what holiness. It understands holiness as a limitation on power. So now, however, given the political climate, and this is the background to our discussion, right? There are political views that have emerged in response. This is the battle that's being fought. The battle is joined between a doctrine on one side and a doctrine on the other side. And Fruman's voice is a minority voice in the camp of the religious Zionists. In the camp of the religious Zionists, there's encouragement to enter the Temple Mount, to the point where you have these three views, even though not all three of these people are themselves religious Zionists. They're all, the first two are members of Likud. Tzipi Hatevli, who writes, the construction of the temple, they want to rebuild the temple. in its place on Temple Mount should symbolize the renewal of the sovereignty of the people of Israel in its land. Gila Gamliel, who I think was a minister, was also a minister in the Likud. Hatav Li was the minister for diaspora affairs. And Gamliel says, but the temple is our identification card. It's our right over the land. Again, it's about control. It's about power. And Moshe Feiglin, who in many ways the most extreme of all, he's no longer a member of Knesset. Feiglin said that the attempt at settlement is secondary. The main action is the temple and rebuilding the temple. That's what really counts. And that's what the messianic activity needs to be focused on. And here he says it clearly. It's not a religious thing, right? Entering the temple. It's about sovereignty. We are here on the Temple Mount on a national mission. Every Jew that goes up the mountain, every single Jewish foot stubbornly ascending the Temple Mount reclaims Israel's sovereignty, not only on the mountain, but for our whole land, right? Because the mountain is the apex of the land. It's the center of Jewish life. If we control the center, we control the periphery. The menorah, symbol of the state of Israel, will return in our day to illuminate our temple, God willing. Okay, now look at your first two sources in the package. Two contrasting sources, 1 and 2, right? Everybody have that? The first is a poster hanging at the Hillel office, a poster that was issued in 1925 by the then chief rabbi of Palestine, Rabbi Kook, who was himself a messianist. Nevertheless, he strictly forbids entering the temple area. It's strictly forbidden. We'll see in a moment why. But there is an understanding. I want to tell you what the psychological dimension of forbidding the entry in the Temple Mount is. It's not for us to rebuild the temple. That's not our business. We have to leave it alone. You know who understood that? Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan, when he saw the flag in 1967 on the Temple Mount, he had the soldiers take it down. Of course, he made a pejorative comment. He said, we don't need a Vatican. But he understood something very profound, it seems to me. The danger of reassertion of our control and the conflict that would result. Now, against Rabbi Kook, and Rabbi Kook, and whom all these rabbis recognize as the most significant religious figure and religious Zionist figure, is an advertisement that appeared in the Israeli newspapers in 2014 as a letter of encouragement. And the letter, I'll read the first line and then read some of the names of the rabbis. L'shichno tidreshu ubata shama. To his place of residence you shall pursue, or you shall seek and come there. Achat hadrachim hachashuvot. One of the important ways, lidrishat hamikdash, of seeking the temple, lidrosh b'yameinu, in our days, hi ha'aliyah lahar beit Hashem, is the ascent to God's Temple Mount. An ascent that for centuries was forbidden religiously to Jews because they were in a state of impurity. You'll see in a moment. These rabbis say, well, we go to a mikveh and then we ascend the mountain. And now, the language is very significant. It's Feiglin's language, because the halachic language that Rabbi Kook uses is knisa, entering the temple area. That's the discussion in the Talmud. Do Jews have the right, or in the sources, in the halachic, medieval halachic sources, should Jews enter the temple precincts? For Feiglin and for the rabbis who are sympathetic to that point of view, it's not knisa, entering, it's aliyah. And aliyah is a loaded term. Aliyah, it's not just ascent. Aliyah is a political act, right? It's settlement. It's exactly what creating the state of Israel is all about. And the aliyah to the temple is a way of stating that the final nail in the coffin of the counterclaims against us, we are banging in the way in which we assert we have arrived. We're not moving from here. We have ultimate control from now into the future, forever, because we're in God's place. Now, the rabbis who signed this, among them, there are some moderate rabbis. Rabbi Riskin signed it. Rabbi Meidan, who's the head of the yeshiva in Har Tion, and Rabbi Rabinowitz, who passed away last week, although he wasn't so moderate. He was certainly a learned, scholarly man, and many others whose names some of you will be familiar with. All right, so that's a background. Now, where does the prohibition come from? Turn to the Rambam. It's page number 4 in the English. I still can't see everybody. I'm trying to see everybody. Jerome asked if Rabbi Lau. I don't know what Rabbi Lau's opinion is.
Chaim, do you see? It looks different on my screen, but there should be something that says gallery view or show grid video.
I don't have. In fact, I don't have any.
If he's sharing the screen, I don't know if he can see the gallery view.
He's not sharing the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Top right, Chaim. Top right of your screen.
Yeah.
There's a little. It looks like a telephone pad.
It does.
Oh, yeah.
I don't. 1 second. I don't have it. All right. I don't have it on my screen. Hold on 1 second. Let me see. Zoom. I don't. All right. That's okay. All right. I'll be all right.
If you want, we can all we can all tell you we're here.
Or I can stop sharing the text.
No, at the end. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Let's go with Maimonides, page 4. All right, everybody, please. And if again any questions, please interrupt. All right. So Maimonides asserts clearly that the Temple Mount is a holy place. In light of the holiness of the Temple Mount, it's therefore forbidden for us to enter the Temple Mount, because since the destruction of the temple, there has not been a proper way for us to purify ourselves. We do not have a red heifer. That's why the people who want to rebuild the temple are trying to raise some red heifers. All right, so let's read what Maimonides says, because it's quite interesting. Paragraph number 16. Now, why is it my contention that as far as the sanctuary in Jerusalem are concerned, the first sanctification hallowed them for all time to come, whereas the sanctification of the rest of the land of Israel, which involved the laws of the sabbatical year and tithes and like matters, did not hallow the land for all time to come? Because, so what Maimonides is distinguishing between is the following, that the first, what he calls sanctification, was Joshua's conquest. But he understands that conquest has a limited role, because you have power for only, power is ephemeral. You have power for a short period of time, and then you are defeated. When you're defeated, you lose that sanctity that's extended by virtue of the fact that you are there, that your control is there. It's not a thick sanctity from Maimonides' point of view. However, the sanctification of Jerusalem survives eternally. And he explains why. Because the sanctity of the sanctuary and of Jerusalem derives from the divine presence, which could not be banished. Now, this is very unusual in Maimonides to see such a formulation, because it sounds rather, I want to say, almost mystical and mythic in its notion that God dwells there. So there are two possibilities. And here again, I don't know for sure. I also have a suspicion that Maimonides wanted to control access to holiness, that he understood the dangers of holiness. And you got to keep people away from any sniffing around holy places, so they might get a whiff of the fact that that redemption is at hand, because you have to go slowly, no revolutions. And the thing that he really got was Jewish law was the best sobering device to sort of pour some water on the hotheads who want to jump ecstatically into the future of redemption and unleash terror. And basically, because that's what's happened throughout history. So go slowly in your approach to God and understand that you live in this world. I think he wants to keep us away from God's world. So he creates a precinct that's forbidden. It's interesting, right? And now he says that the Shekhinah is there. The two best explanations that I've read on that are, number one, that Solomon's temple was sanctified because God miraculously, a fire came down it's in Chronicles. A fire came from heaven and came on the altar. So the sanctity was sort of a divine sanctity. And then when the Maccabees rebuilt the temple, there was again a story about discovering the fire that Jeremiah had hidden in the fire, God's fire, and rediscovery of that fire actually grants new sanctity to the temple. So the kavod, the glory of God, is there as a function of the fact that God brought holiness into this temple. The second explanation, which I actually like more, but I don't know if it makes sense, is that the sanctity of Jerusalem derives from the fact that we'll see this later on, that it's Ir HaTzedek. It's the city that's a source of justice, because the Temple Mount was the place where the Sanhedrin sat. So that holiness, you might say the Shekhinah came to Jerusalem because holiness spread from the law, the Torah that emerged from the city. Perhaps. I mean, Maimonides might like that. I don't know if he meant that. All right. So he continues to say as follows. Does it not say, and I will bring your sanctuary to desolation, wherefrom the sages have averred, even though they are desolate, the sanctuaries retain their pristine holiness. All right. I will bring your sanctuary. But it will remain a sanctuary. So understand what I want to go back to what I said earlier. Maimonides figures out all sorts of intricate ways to limit the special nature of what we might call inherent sanctity. Priests have functional role. The sacrifices are intended only to wean us from idolatry. In other words, he's trying to move away from any sort of essential holiness that the people could access. And here he actually treads over the line by saying the Shekhinah is there, but in doing so, he's saying it's not a place for us. Right? That's interesting. Humans shouldn't barge into the temple, as we read just before. It's not for us. By contrast, the obligation, I'm sorry, let's skip this. Let's skip the next paragraph. When Ezra, however, came up and hallowed the land, he hallowed it not by conquest, but merely by the act of taking possession. Therefore, every place that was possessed by those who came up from Babylonia and hallowed by the second sanctification of Ezra is holy today, even though the land was later wrested from them. And the law, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so Maimonides explains that when Ezra came and settled the land, all of the land of Israel became holy because Ezra settled the land through peace, through the means of settlement. Recognized. We can talk about that in terms of whether early Zionists understood what the Maimonides passage. All right, but Maimonides is clear. The temple is a holy precinct. It's not for us. The Shekhinah resides there. We cannot tread there in our state of being defiled, of defilement, of impurity. Against the Rambam, his arch interlocutor, Rabbi Abraham ibn Dawood, writes, this ruling derives from his own reasoning. Where does Maimonides come up with this idea? Who said this? It doesn't exist. There's no Talmudic source for this. Right? He quotes a verse. It's his own drasha. He makes up the drasha, Maimonides. Right? He's trying to justify his own idea. And I know not where it comes from. According to the view that the first sanctification was not meant to be forever, there is no distinction between the temple and Jerusalem. Right? Neither of them are sacred. And the rest of the land of Israel. Neither Israel nor the Temple Mount are sacred. Moreover, I say that even according to Rabbi Yosei, I don't want to get too complicated here, but I'll read it, who said that the second sanctification was meant to be forever. He only said this regarding the rest of the land of Israel, but regarding Jerusalem and the temple, he did not say it. For Ezra knew that the temple, this is important, for Ezra knew that the temple and Jerusalem would change in the future and be sanctified by another eternal sanctification with the glory of God forever. All right. So the sanctification of Jerusalem needs to be transmitted by in a divine way through the Messiah. It's a divine prerogative. Thus it was revealed to me, God's mystery to those who fear him. Therefore, one who enters there, the temple site today, is not liable for excision. That means, right, for karet, for entering the holy place without permission. It's not holy. It can only be sanctified in the future by the Messiah. Ravad ibn Daud is a mystic. So Ibn Daud, if you want to hear his argument, you can smile with me. He says, how can Maimonides say what he does? He has no source for what he's saying. He made it up. However, I had a revelation, and therefore you should believe me. All right? All right. So with that, you can buy whatever you want to buy. And so you see the argument. The mystic argues from his imagination. Maimonides argues from reason. I mean, I'm a little prejudiced here, but the fact is that's what's going on here. But nevertheless, the mystic has a strong argument. The mystic says that Jerusalem is the apex. We can't have a situation where the land is holy, right? I'm sorry, where Jerusalem is holy and the land itself is not holy. It can't be, because it's like the second story of a building, right? Without the first story. The first story is the land of Israel. So if the land of Israel is not holy, right? How could Jerusalem be holy? The only time that it will be holy will be in the future when God grants its sanctity. So the Messianists, this is the argument. The Maimonideans say, stay away. Rav Kook is with the Maimonideans. The holy precincts are left for God. Ibn Daud also agrees that the holy precincts are left for God, but they're not holy. Therefore, we should enter. So Ravad ibn Daud opens the door. It's an interesting way. Opens the door to messianic and political activism. The Tanchuma, I'm not going to read. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the introduction to the Dibbuk about the levels of holiness. It's about the mythic nature of the sanctity, the centrality. You look at the last line here in this midrash. The ark is at the center of the Holy of Holies. In other words, Jerusalem. I should read it. I'm sorry. Source number 5. Just as the navel is found at the center of the human being, so the land of Israel is the navel of the world, right? The center of the universe, as it says, living at the center of the earth. The land of Israel is found at the center of the earth. Jerusalem is at the center of the land of Israel. The temple is at the center of Jerusalem. The Holy of Holies is at the center of the temple. The ark is at the center of the Holy of Holies. And the foundation stone is in front of the ark, which spot is the foundation of the world. Okay. Now, what I want to show you is, because I'm going to push in the Maimonidean direction, is a process that goes on through the sources of what I call a spiritualization of Jerusalem. So place becomes a spiritual center. In what way? So let's turn the page first. We'll come back to this source in a moment. I want to show you, first of all, let's turn to page 8. Source number 9 and 10. Sources number 9 and 10. Fascinating. In the book of Exodus, it says in verse 8 of chapter 25, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Yasuli Mikdash v'shachanti betocham, that I may dwell among them. Whereas in Deuteronomy, what we read is that I will be seen, they will make a pilgrimage to the place where I have chosen, l'shakain shemi sham, to establish my name, to make my name dwell there. So the holy place has been transformed from a residence of God, implying some physical presence, to a spiritual home for a name. Right? What's present in the temple? Nothing. In other words, the Titus was scandalized when he entered the Holy of Holies, and it was empty. Right? That's the point. We have invisibility, not physical presence. And the holiness of the temple is loaded on to abstraction. And the goal, we'll see this in a moment, the goal is to refine our way of thinking and not to get caught up and trapped in the notion of sacred space, and understand sacred space symbolically as a way of leading us inside ourselves. Take a look. Go back now to the Talmud and to Maimonides. I want to show you a contrast. Source number 6. Source number 6 says as follows. The sages taught in a Tosefta, it's a Gemara, right, in Brachot. A blind person and one who is unable to approximate the directions. Here we're back at Qibla, direction. To what do you face? And therefore is unable to face Jerusalem in order to pray, may focus his heart towards his Father in heaven, as it is stated, and they shall pray to the Lord. One who is standing in prayer in the diaspora should focus his heart toward toward Eretz Israel, as it is stated, etc., etc. One who is standing in Eretz Israel should focus his heart toward Jerusalem, as it is stated. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? One who is standing in Jerusalem should focus his heart toward the temple, as it is stated. So it starts with a blind person, should focus his heart, and then it goes through the motions from people who are present until they are present in Jerusalem, at the temple itself, in the land of Israel and at the temple itself. Let's see how Maimonides formulates this piece of Talmud and understand what a creative mind does. In other words, the Rambam took the Gemara and he rewrote it. How did he write it? He had in his law code, he says, you have to face towards Jerusalem, okay? And how does he explain the law? With face turned towards the temple. Anyone outside Palestine turns his face towards the land of Israel and recites the prayer. He omits the verses, the proof text. One who is in the Holy Land turned towards Jerusalem, turns his face. The Hebrew is mechaven et panav. One who is in Jerusalem turns his face towards the temple. If one is in the temple, he turns his face towards the Holy of Holies. A person who is either blind or unable to determine the right direction or is on a ship directs his heart to the divine presence and praise. Fascinating. First of all, the Rambam turns the Gemara around. The Gemara, the Talmud, starts with a blind person and ends with a concrete presence in the temple. The Rambam starts with or approaches concretization, presence in the temple, and ends with abstraction, someone who can't see. The Gemara uses throughout lechaven et libo to direct the heart. The Rambam distinguishes between the person who has some sort of physical presence. Physical presence he uses lechaven et panav, direct his face, right? Whereas the blind person is to direct his heart. Now the point that the Rambam is getting at is that he's building up to a crescendo. The high point of prayerful direction is not necessarily to be there, but to be there in your spirit, to be there with your intention. More important than physical presence is intentionality. That's what the Rambam wants to get at. So that the Rambam is digging under, I mean, that's what's happening here, digging under physical holiness. He's digging under space. He doesn't want us to get trapped in the possibility of idolatry, of fetishization, of space. He wants to liberate us spiritually and still hold on to the symbols. Remember, it's a symbol. We don't throw it out. We are, as a people, we embrace the tradition, but we reinterpret the tradition and we understand its inner significance. That's the goal, because not to do so, and we're not going to read this Talmud, piece of Talmud above. It's source number 7. It's known to many people. It's a tragic piece. It's about two priests who are running up the altar to try to make the sacrifice, and the one priest who is lagging behind on the altar ramp stabs the other priest on the altar, and the father of the priest who's dying comes and finds that the priest is still alive, so that the knife that was used is not defiled because it hasn't been used to generate death. So therefore the sacrifices can continue. I mean, if you can imagine something so obscene and so awful. This is a political Gemara. It's talking about the dangers of holiness. It's talking about the fact that we have to beware of the fact that the passions of holiness lead to bloodshed. I mean, if you read the Talmudic passage, it's clear that that's what the Gemara understands. Stay away. Don't get caught up. You'll kill each other and you'll kill others if you get caught up in the hitlahavut, and sort of this passionate pushing towards the center of holiness, towards God's presence. Okay.
Does
So
that relate to
go ahead.
Nadav and Avihu also?
Excuse me?
Does that relate to the story of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aharon?
Yeah. So that's interesting. the sons of Aaron, whom we read in Leviticus 4 times, we read about it. I think it's referred to, sacrifice a foreign fire. It's called Eish Zara. What that is, I mean, there's some interesting discussion, but I want to go with where you're going. There's a point where Nadav and Avihu basically entered into, I think that's a possibility. They entered too deep into the realm of holiness and they expired. They were consumed. They were consumed by the passion of their own inner fire. I mean, I think, and now Philo sees this as an attainment of ultimate holiness. The Ramban, a mystic, understands this in a sort of a positive way. The majority of the traditionalists understand there's a negative, there's a critique. Now, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says on this passage, very interesting, he brings to bear on the passage of the sons of Aaron who die the first day in the temple dedication, actually, right after the tabernacle had been completed in the celebration of the completion. I mean, if you can imagine the tragedy. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe quotes the Talmudic passage about the 4 rabbis who entered Pardes. So 4 rabbis entered the garden of speculation, right? 1 went crazy, 1 committed suicide, 1 became a heretic. Only Rabbi Akiva, it says, entered in peace and exited in peace. And since it's Lag BaOmer, I might as well add and say, I'm not so sure that Rabbi Akiva exited in peace, because he then supported the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which created the biggest tragedy that befell the Jews until the Holocaust. So it's a real problem when you enter the precincts of holiness. That's what I want to say. It's something that there are too many warning stories about it, right? So you're right. Nadav and Avihu was a warning. We read it, by the way, in Yom Kippur. It's very interesting. It's a warning against excessive embrace of holiness. Our domain needs to be how to make the world holy, not how to escape the world into the realm of the holy. All right, then we become too holy, and no one else is good enough for us. So we need to beware. I mean, it's so important, that sense of limitation. Okay. Any other questions up till now? We still have a little bit of time.
One quick question.
Yes, who's asking?
Jerome.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wasn't there, I would always been told the issue is, since we don't know where the Kodesh Dashim was, we don't know where the Devir was, was, so we don't go up there, right, because there's no way to know where anything is.
Correct. All right. So that's another factor. Okay. So look, there are a number of factors, because the Rambam can be overcome, as these rabbis say, go to the mikveh, but it's not the para aduma. All right. So therefore, they say, we know where the precincts of the Holy of Holies, that's the real concern. As long as we don't tread on the precinct of the Holy of Holies, once we go to the mikveh, it's okay for us to ascend the Temple Mount. I mean, so there's that type of rationale. That's why I'm telling you that in some ways, the intricacies of the halacha are beside the point, that the issue is a general issue. Does the tradition want you to ascend the mountain, or it wants you to refrain from ascending the mountain? Does the tradition want you to make sure that what's going on earth is good before you go up the mountain? Is the tradition worried about people going up the mountain and what happens when you go up the mountain, right? And you get crazed by the fact that you've beheld the divine, all right? So it seems to me, you're right, Jerome, that there is that. That's why Rabbi Goren spent his life, drawing diagrams, studying the midot, the measurements of the Temple Mount, and being able to draw exactly where it was. I mean, and all, and there are people doing this business. You're right about that. But I'm trying to move beyond what I consider to be a smaller conversation to the larger conversation. Okay. Now, if you can turn for a moment, I want to mention a source number 11, because of its interest, and then I want to sort of bring us to a concluding section. Actually, there's one more comment and then the concluding section. So this comment here it's source number 11. It's all in Hebrew. It's a comment in a spiritual work by Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who was the primary student of the Gaon of Vilna, who established the greatest academy in Lithuania, the yeshiva of Volozhin, Eitz Chaim in Volozhin, and one of the graduates of that yeshiva, or who was ordained at that yeshiva, was Rabbi Kook, who studied, I shouldn't say Rabbi Kook, the first chief rabbi, and Chaim Nachman Bialik, the poet laureate, also studied at the yeshiva in Volozhin. So Rabbi Chaim, who's an opponent of Hasidism, and part of the opposition, by the way, to Hasidism was an opposition to the ecstasy, to the attempt to climb the mountain in the spiritual tradition, and to ground. It's about grounding. So he says as follows, Uledarkenu, says Reb Chaim, Yesh lomar, gam kein sherotze lomar, I want to say the following, right? Al tachshavu, do not think, shetachlit kavanati hu asiyat hamikdash hachitzoni. Don't think that the purpose, the goal of my intention, God says, is the external temple. That's not my goal. Ella teidu shekol tachlit ritzoni. You should know that the entire purpose of my will, says God, bitavnit hamishkan, with the form of the tabernacle that I've given you to build, v'chol kelav, and all its vessels, rak l'ramez lachem, just to hint to you, shemimenu tiru, that you should look at that, v'chein ta'asu atem et atzlachem, and so you will make yourselves. So the building of the temple had one intention, great intention, not the building of the building of yourself, not holiness in the temple, but holiness in your heart. Lechavein et libo, the Rambam. I mean, so interesting. We're not talking here about Hasidim. We're talking about spiritual Talmudists and halachists and legalists who understand that the essence of the religious tradition is about pushing us inside ourselves and not getting caught in the externals. It's not about the external temple. In fact, what I wanted to show you, and I'm very fond of this. In Spain, in the 14th century, there were many Bibles that were we have a number of very sort of famous illuminated Bibles, and in all these Bibles, the temple vessels are themselves present. There are always pages with the temple vessels. So I'm going to show you. I happen to have a copy. It's a facsimile of the Kennicott Bible, which is one of those Spanish Bibles. And right after the completion of the Torah, of the 5 books, we have these famous pages. Here, I think if I have the strength to hold it up, here you can see the menorah, temple vessels, the temple, the show on page facing it, the table of the showbread, the cherubs, the ark. I mean, there are some problems with where things are placed, but nevertheless, what is this all about? What is this about? Well, you should know. In medieval Spain, the Tanakh, the Bible, this is the Bible, was called Mikdash, the temple of God. Wow. The rabbis in the 15th century, Spanish rabbis, wrote that just like the temple had 3 precincts, it had the outer court, the Heichal, right, the inner court, and the Holy of Holies, so too the Bible has the outer court, the writings, Ketubim, the inner court, the prophets, Nevi'im, and the Holy of Holies, the Torah. So that this book, the Tanakh, they looked at the temple vessel and they could bring themselves through their imagination in the presence. So it's about intentionality. It's about carrying a vision. It's not about building necessarily. That's how we survived. We didn't get caught up in building projects. We were busy developing our imagination, our interpretive capacity, and our commitment to learning to a text that lives with us. Even the Talmud, I'm fond of this. The title page of a rabbinic book is called a sha'ar, the gate. And the gateway into every book of Talmud depicts Yachinu Boaz, the temple the pillars at the entry to the temple in Jerusalem. So when you open up a book of Talmud, you're entering into the temple. When you open up a Bible, you're in the temple. So therefore, a people that figured out how, even though its temple was destroyed, it can continue to live in the presence of God and understand that God hadn't in any way rejected them because they carry God's word with them and in their interpretive mode. So this is the legacy of Spanish Jewry, the legacy of Reb Chaim of Volozhin as well. Look, now let's look.
Chaim, I just want to point out that practically speaking, sometimes you do have to pay attention to building, as you well know.
Yes, but all right. So I want to say the following: that building projects need to be engaged in with a degree of modesty and an understanding that the building is only itself a means. That's all. I'm not against building. The building is a means. The difference, I always explain, what's the difference between Jacob's dream and Bavel, right? When Bavel means in Arabic, in contemporary Arabic, and there are Semitic roots, right? Bab is gate, El is God. So Bavel is the gate of God, right? Jacob wakes up from his dream and he says, I didn't know that this place is, he has a dream. This place is Sha'ar HaShamayim, the gate of heaven, or the gate of God. So Jacob has a dream about the gate of God. That's good. The Bavel people, they try to build Bavel. That's bad. And why? Because the Bavel people, I would say, built Bavel and they thought they were there. Jacob understood that whatever building, whatever gate was, the gate was a dream and a vision. And it seems to me that's the challenge, to build a building with a vision, to build a program with a vision, to understand the value in what you're doing and not get caught up only in the externals and allow that to dominate and to rule over you. It seems to me that's the tension that I think needs to be generated. And I wish, and I wish that, fundraisers, it's a different course of fundraising. Okay. Now let's look further on to understand what Jerusalem signifies. So if you look at sources 13 and sources.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, go ahead, please. I have only 10.
Why then are all the Haredim so treating the Western world as if it were holy?
Well, all right. So that's a problem. You know what? Like Yeshayahu Leibovich,
Yes.
he was a bit extreme. So Leibovich called the wall, not the kotel, he called it the discotel.
Uh-huh.
Right? So in other words, he tried, and he saw that. Now, look, understand something. There's no problem in seeing the wall as a remnant of the Temple Mountain and as a place of prayer. There is a problem in fetishizing it. And we understand how it's done because it's a political platform. You know that the paratroopers are inducted at the wall. I mean, in other words, it's not a holy, it's not simply, it's complicated. It's complicated by politics. That's the problem. And it's the politics that essentializes it. But you know what? And our community and their community are fighting over these things. That's what we get into a battle over. And lives are lost because of the essentializing of the stones. Rav Kook wrote a poem, wrote some words that were then made into a song. Yesh avanim, I'm sorry, yesh anashim im lev shel even, yesh avanim, what is that it? Im lev adam. Right. There are. I think that's it. We really need to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to get caught up in the stones and maintain the humanity, our sense of humanity. Okay. So now I wanted you to see sources 13 and 14 and there's a lot of material on this because the Bible is clear in the ways in which it asserts that Jerusalem is a city of righteousness. Ir HaTzedek. Isaiah calls it Ir HaTzedek. Who came out to greet Abraham from Shalem, which is Jerusalem? Who came? Malki Tzedek. Who came to greet later on, I think Joshua? Adoni Tzedek comes to greet Joshua. So throughout the Bible, Tzedek, justice, righteousness is related to Jerusalem. Isaiah proclaims, Tion b'mishpat tipadeh. I claimed earlier that the holiness and the sanctity of Jerusalem has to do with it being the center of not just of justice, of universal justice. All right, we'll come to that in a moment. Now, I want to take you on a little ride through the final sources. Source number 15, right? It's a midrash. It says as follows. All right, I'll tell you Baal Peh, right? You can read it on your own. God wants to give a name to Jerusalem, but he says, I have two devotees, Malki Tzedek, who greeted Abraham. He's a monotheist, and he calls it Shalem. Abraham, he's my devotee. He calls it Yireh, God will be seen. That's what he said on Mount Moriah, when after bringing the Akedah of Isaac. So God says, if I name it Shalem, right, then Abraham's going to be offended. If I name it Yireh, then Melchizedek is going to be offended. So rather than offend either one, I will name the city Yireh Shalem, or Yerushalayim, so that Jerusalem is, by the name itself, is an inclusive name. The vision of Jerusalem, the midrashic vision of Jerusalem, is one that includes both the Abrahamic tradition and the tradition of the Canaanites who dwelled there under the leadership of Melchizedek prior to Abraham's arrival. Fascinating. So that they have if they're monotheists, they join in together with Abrahamic monotheists. And so we understand that the bedrock of Jerusalem is a commitment to monotheism. And Isaiah would say, and the prophets, that it's the monotheism that links it to a tradition of justice. That's the values that derive from monotheism. Source number 16, right? That was source number 15. Source number 16. Again, can't read it through. It's a Persian midrash from the early medieval period. And a midrash that was, I think, emanated from Persia, but I don't know, it may have been written in the land of Israel. I don't know. That's where they found it. Right? And the midrash says as follows. It's commenting on the verse in Deuteronomy that God hovers over that place all the day. So all the day is interpreted to be eternally. And the question becomes, how can God be hovering over that place, meaning the Temple Mount, all the day? The temple is destroyed, say all the tradition, the traditional questioners. The Midrash says, yes, the temple is destroyed, but the people who are there now have built their own holy place over that place. The holiness of their place derives from the fact that it's built on the site of Solomon's temple. Here you have a Jewish analog, right, to the ancient tradition that the Muslims, it seems to me, felt when they came to Jerusalem, that they understood that they're building the dome on the site of Solomon's temple because it draws on the holiness. And here's a rabbi who understands that the sanctity of the place persists irrespective of the fact that the Muslims are there now because they built a place dedicated to the one God. And when the Messiah comes, we'll all be able to worship there together. All right, exactly as it says in Isaiah 17 and Micah 18. Isaiah proclaims, if you look at the final verse, in verse 7 in chapter 56, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. And Micah famously quoting Isaiah, that swords shall be turned into plowshares, quoting that vision, ends the vision by saying, right, but every man, though all the peoples walk each in the name of its gods, we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever, suggesting that at the end of days, we will walk up to the Temple Mount with other nations, and they will pray in their language to their God, and we will pray in our language to our God, but we will all realize that we're all praying to the same one God. And the Temple Mount will be a place of universal worship, universal justice, and universal devotion to God. And the universality will emanate from the temple. This sense of universality was drawn by a 20th century Palestinian who settled, who had to leave Jerusalem the early part of the 20th century for political reasons, and settled in Hoboken, New Jersey. He became the chief rabbi of Hoboken, New Jersey, and he wrote a lot. Very important rabbi named Chaim Hershenson. Hershenson is alert to many of the movements of modernity, and very sensitive, and certainly to historical phenomena. He lives around the time of the League of Nations, and he sees Wilson as some sort of tzaddik in his own time, as a righteous person, but he says the following: the temple of the future will be different from the League of Nations. The difference will be, this is so striking, that in the League of Nations, all the nations will come forward with their flags, and the flags will hang outside the main building, and each nation will be committed, will still be committed to its own nationalism when it claims that it's part of this sort of universal whole. In the Temple Hall of Nations, there will be no flags, meaning it's exactly where I started. Religion is about calling a halt to nationalism as a dominant force. Nationalism has a role to play in people's self-expression, but the dominant force has to be one to go beyond nationalism, to sense the unity of humanity. And the vision of a temple in the future, as far as Hershenson is concerned, is a place of unification and a place of ultimate inclusivity. All right. If I can ask you, if we can conclude, I have two final teachings. It's the last two sources on the supplement. If I can find my supplemental page myself, I'm coming to it right now. Okay, source number 5 and source number 6. Okay, does everybody see that? 5 and 6. No, they're all above. Right. 5 is on the bottom of them. Sorry, Giselle. Right. It's 5. In the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai taught as follows. Some of you are familiar with this. If you have a sapling in your hand and it is said to you, behold, there is the Messiah, go on with your planting, and afterward go out and receive him. Okay? So this is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who I don't know if Mariana is on the phone today, who didn't ask Vespasian to grant him Jerusalem. He chose Yavne. He said, I don't want that. I don't want revolution. I want continuity. I want study. I want commitment to holiness that will result from God, from our attempt to bring God's word to the people. And if you say to you, he continues, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if you say to you, let us go up and build the temple, do not listen to them. But if the elders say to you, come, let us destroy the temple, listen to them. For the building of youth is destruction, and the destruction of old age is building. Proof of the matter is Rehoboam, son of Solomon, who listened to his young counterparts who urged him to tax the people, and he lost the United Kingdom as a result. He rejected the elders who told him not to tax. So the destruction of the elders is building. The building of youth sometimes is destruction. It's one of the most profound teachings that I've seen in rabbinic literature. So let's be careful in the way in which we approach the holy. All right. The last thing I want to read with you,
Hey, Chaim, before you go on, this is Mariana. I just want to say, but it led to the murder of 1 million plus Jews to make that decision. So that also led to destruction.
What do you mean led to the murder of?
He chose Yavne and he didn't ask, and that led, and more than 1 million people died.
No, but the fact is that the opponents would have killed him too. In other words, there were Jews who would have killed Yochanan ben Zakkai, for sure. He understood that. the rebels, the zealots. They were leading the cat was out of the bag. They had destroyed the stores in Jerusalem. They basically invited the Roman. They invited the Roman destruction. There was nothing that can. It was gone already. It was gone. He did what he could to save the remnant.
Right. He had to sacrifice them.
Yeah, but in other words, but I think that I don't know if we study the historical circumstances, the people were already sacrificed. He didn't sacrifice them. The zealots led the rebellion. They led the sacrifice. He opposed the war to begin with. That's the point. There were rabbis who opposed the war and opposed the rebellion. They didn't listen to them. They were the elders, right? This is the point. The youth went out in rebellion and they led to destruction. That's exactly what happened. Okay, now we have to be careful, says the writer Yoram Galili in a poem that appeared a few years ago in a new journal of Israeli poetry called Mashiv HaRuach. He writes about the Temple Mount as follows: Lama hifne Mariana, Lama hifnetem oref liyavne. Why have you betrayed? Why have you turned your back on Yavne? V'chazartem lekan v'shpoch dam al har, and returned here to the Temple Mount to spill blood on the mountain. Ki'ilu alfei tzonu bakar lohu spiku, as if thousands of slaughtered cattle were insufficient. Ki'ilu Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai miyutar, as if Yochanan ben Zakkai, who founded Yavne, was unnecessary and superfluous. L'shema nasanu kol zot al kapayim. For what purpose did we carry this rabbinic Judaism on our hands? Carry it forward. What did we carry? Tfilot, lamdanut, gmilut chasadim, right? Rabbinic Judaism. Lamdanut is Torah. Tfilot, avodah. Gmilut chasadim is gmilut chasadim. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot is a declaration. Rabbinic Judaism is a departure. We're declaring that that Judaism is not about the temple. Judaism is about Torah, avodah, study of Torah, worship, devotion, and acts of kindness, and gmilut chasadim, and morality, right? That's what Judaism is all about. It's a break. There's a break. Yochanan ben Zakkai is making a break. And why have we abandoned the teachings of Rabbinic Judaism? Ech yerdu mimtarim shel bracha mishamayim. How will blessed rains pour out from heaven? Right? And where will the creativity and growth come from? In Bagai shuv olim korbanot yeladim. If in the valley Gehinom, we're going to once again slaughter young children. Im hadam shuv zoreim kan. I mean Molech. We're going to sacrifice to Molech. That's what he's alluding to. Im hadam shuv zoreim kan. If the blood is still flowing here, ve'ein lo socher, and there's no dam to dam up the blood. Umarveh adama rumusa kemochatzer. And the ground is saturated, trampled like a courtyard. So that's the question. What do we want? Do we want to have a tradition that derives its inspiration from values that allow us to transcend the reality? Or do we want to be mired in the battles of holiness that will create or generate more and more bloodshed through the generations? I say that we have a clear choice in front of us and that we know what we have to embrace, and that our tradition has allowed us, in some ways it's liberated us and allowed us to survive, and hopefully will do so if we can focus on that dimension in a creative and growth way rather than get caught and get trampled, it seems to me, in a destructive politics. Shalom, we'll see you next week. Take care. Send me your questions.
So Chaim, do you like my background?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Here you are. Here's everybody. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
we just
Good to see you. Great lecture.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yasher Koach. Yasher Koach. Beautiful.
Greetings
Thanks,
from New
Chaim.
York.
Yasher Koach.
Good to see everybody.
Very nice.
Thank
Thank you, Chaim. Happy Lag Bomer.
Thank you, Sam.
Be a lot of
Doreen, Chaim.
students. I
Love you, Chaim.
Chaim, it's Saul. Rev Chaim.
So, yes.
Alan. Santa Barbara, I love you.
Thanks, Chaim.
So, Ron. Hi, Ron. Ron Gutman. Huh.
More power to you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaim.
Okay,
Thank you,
see you
Chaim.
next week.
Honey,
you
I'm
next
not a
week.
See
great
you next
lecture.
week, Chaim.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
that picture is gorgeous.
All right, boss. Oh,
I'm leaving the meeting. Okay.
okay.
I'm leaving the meeting.